Hello everyone and welcome to Blog Runner Everything and welcome back to the channel and welcome to another episode where we are going to be doing another deep dive on a topic that I found myself taking too much time thinking about, and this time around I was thinking about Barcelona's next tactical evolution under Xavi Hernandez. So needless to say that a lot of what I will say will be conjecture and assumptions based off of reality and current trends in the game that a lot of uber successful positional play teams are using to dominate their opponents. So, if that sounds interesting to you, do feel free to get comfortable and to stay tuned. If you find yourself enjoying the experience, give us a like and hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. And thanks to everyone who has already subscribed, because we just hit 4K subs on the YouTube channel, guys, and it wouldn't have been possible without your support. So I thank you very much. With all of that said, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion, and I will start by laying a bit of a foundation so that we can stay on the same page. The foundation in question will be a little something called Zone 14. So, what is Zone 14? Now, for most people who are familiar with football in even a basic way, you will be aware that the football pitch can be divided horizontally into three equal parts: the defensive third, the middle third, and the final third. These horizontal thirds can be further split into two halves each, so we have a top half and a bottom half for each of the defensive, middle, and final thirds. If we then for a moment consider how the pitch can also be sliced into three equal parts vertically, and if we take those three vertical slices and we go on to superimpose them onto the horizontal thirds that we had split up earlier, we will end up dividing the pitch into 18 identical rectangles, each of which we will refer to as zones. These zones are then numbered from 1 to 18, starting from the zone nearest to the position of left back and ending with the zone nearest to the position of right winger from left to right. It's to this dissected and bisected version of the pitch that I will be referring to whenever I mention Zone 14. And just to give a clearer picture to those who are only listening to the podcast and aren't watching on YouTube, Zone 14 covers the area of the pitch in the final third that is straight ahead of the opponent's goal, but in the bottom half of the final third. So just think of it as an arbitrary box surrounding the D outside the penalty box. Now, why is this area of great significance, you may ask? And the answer to that is because science. No, seriously though, it's because the nerds and the boffins who keep track of the stats in football have shown that majority of actions that lead to a goal in a match of football happen in Zone 14. So whether it's an assist, a key pass, or a shot, Zone 14 boasts the highest likelihood of one of those actions leading to a goal. Naturally, teams set up offensively to try and get into Zone 14, and conversely, defending teams have also adopted defensive setups that actively seek to stop attacking teams from exploiting that space. So, what does any of this have to do with Barca? Well, you see, whenever a certain Pedri has been unavailable for Barca, they have found it very difficult to create quality goal-scoring chances, because rather than looking to create from Zone 14, they instead find themselves forced to operate from wide in Zone 16 and Zone 18. You see, the lack of another midfielder who can operate in Zone 14 at the same level as Pedri means that Barcelona have to rely more on creating from wide areas. This lack of another elite creative midfielder is really only a secondary reason that forces Barcelona to shift their approaches. The primary reason why they tend to shift from attacking through the middle to attacking out wide would be the low blocks that teams are now deploying in order to starve Barcelona of possession in zone 14. Even with Pedri on the pitch, admittedly they still find it hard. But you see, Barcelona are a team that needs to have possession in that zone 14 area in order to punish the opposition. This desire to maximize time on the ball in zone 14 is the biggest reason why last season Xavi introduced a newish tactical approach where Barcelona would change shape from a 4-3-3 or 4-4-2 in defensive phases to a 3-4-3 or 3-2-2-3, but both with that WM kind of formation. And please do note, I said newish because the WM formation has been around for centuries now, but it's being brought back these days courtesy of positional play teams that are trying to find new ways of overcoming parked buses or deep blocks, and the WM just so happens to be a good solution for all of that. And I'll explain to you why. But at this point, I'm first going to go on a bit of a tangent regarding deep blocks. Now, I'm fairly certain that we are all familiar with this term or with the term parked bus. Basically, a deep block or a parked bus is when a team sets up with the majority, if not all, of its on-pitch players occupying spaces in the defensive third of the pitch. Those blocks tend to be in a 3-5-2 or 5-4-1 or 4-4-2 kind of formation that usually tends to have either 3 center-backs or at least 2 defensive midfielders who operate in close proximity with their center-backs. The intention behind such deep blocks is usually very straightforward and simple. It's to crowd the area in front and behind zone 14 and force the attacking team to go into the wide areas in zones 13, 16, 15, and 18. So it does tend to be quite a formidable formation because when you look at it, you find that in the final third, the opponent has a bank of about 8 players in banks of 4s. And if you look at it from those vertical slices, that we looked at of the pitch earlier, then your opponent can have as many as 6 players as well, just congested into that central zone. And if you've watched the matches between Inter and Barca in 2010, you can see a very good example of a deep block being deployed to stifle positional play and to nullify the influence of creative players in zone 14. Now, without a doubt, matches such as those between Barca and Inter in 2010 and that 2014 exit Barcelona suffered at the hands of Atletico Madrid in the Champions League would have forced guys like Xavi and Pep to think of new tactical variations for combating deep lying blocks. And it would seem that both of those managers, including others like Arteta and Spalletti, who also have the positional play kind of systems, seems that all these guys have come to the same conclusion for how to beat that deep lying block, which is the WM formation. Most people, though, choose to focus on the so-called box midfield, which is for me just really a subset or a consequence of the WM kind of shape. And so here you can see how Arsenal, Man City, Barca, and Napoli all use the WM shape. And like I had said earlier, it seems like the WM formation is really the best solution for positional play if you're trying to unlock a deep lying block. See, the reason why the WM formation is more or less a no-brainer or really a natural adaptation to these parked buses is that it gives you a solution for the 2 big problems that a deep block poses. Those problems are, firstly, how do you take back control of zone 14? Secondly, how do you cope with the inevitable counterattacks once the opponent takes the ball off of your players in the final or middle thirds. The first problem finds its solution in how the WM formation allows players that can make clever runs or passes and take up good positions to easily create numerical overloads in Zone 14 and to exploit half spaces, thereby opening up passing lanes between the lines. Here, for example, we can see how the movement of Napoli's interiors, Ometsala's, and their false nine created space and opened up a passing lane. Secondly, it solves the conundrum of how to cope with counterattacks because the double pivot base of the box midfield can work easily with the three deepest defenders to block passing lanes through the center of the pitch and into opposing forwards. In addition to that, and assuming the team playing in a deep block is just operating with 2 or 3 forwards, the M base of the WM formation means that the opponent will regularly find themselves outnumbered in 3v5 or 2v5 kinds of scenarios. Now, earlier on, I made mention of the fact that Pep and Arteta, like Xavi, are also using the WM formation. The ways in which the three are accomplishing this at the moment, though, is varied, and it is this variation that I feel holds some of the keys to how Xavi could be looking to evolve his team. So let's start by looking at Pep Guardiola. In a nutshell, he has been implementing the WM shape in 2 different ways. His first implementation made use of an inverting fullback, and then his second implementation used an overlapping centre-back of sorts. Overlapping or just advancing. I don't know which word to use there. Similar to Pep's first iteration, Arteta has gone about things by deploying an inverted fullback in the form of Zinchenko, who happened to be one of Pep's inverted fullbacks in the past. As for Xavi, he has opted to do it in a much more different way, which is perhaps the least efficient and also the most difficult, but also one with higher unpredictability. Xavi implemented his WM by fielding 4 midfielders, sacrificing a winger, and asking his 4th midfielder to invert from a wide position to an interior position. The vacated winger role would then be taken up by an overlapping fullback as the team would transition from a back 4 to a back 3. Now, when this comes off and the opponent fails to adjust, the result of it can be quite devastating, as we saw when Barca beat Real 3-1 in the Supercopa and could really have scored more goals in that game. However, this doesn't change the fact that the overall movements that have to be made in order for the players to get in the WM shape are too many, and the more steps that have to be taken generally, the more difficult it will be for players to execute instructions down to a T, and the more likely things are to go wrong. This is, in effect, what brings me to the whole point of this discussion, because in order to see his team take proper control of Zone 14 and to overcome low blocks and be able to create through Zone 14, even in the absence of his most creative players, Xavi has to come up with a system that would allow his team to transition into a WM shape flawlessly. What exactly does that mean for Barca, though? I mean, what would that even look like? The first and the easiest solution you might think would be for Barca to pick up a fullback who is adept at inverting into midfield and who can both carry the ball well and pick a pass with his life on the line. Now, I have on this channel and podcast already talked about a fullback like Arnau Martinez. Another fullback who could come to mind is perhaps João Cancelo, but that's really not going to be a realistic option considering the finances at hand. So Arnau Martinez would be your most likely transfer, and for me he seems the most obvious choice anyway, and he has shown in his time at Girona that he has the quality to put on strong performances regardless of the opposition. Getting an invertible fullback would mean that he could settle into the pivot space, allowing one of Barca's double pivots, say maybe a Gundogan, to push up, thereby creating that WM shape. It would, however, mean less minutes for someone like Xavi, maybe as well as Balde, who one feels would have to adapt his game to playing as a left centre-back probably. Barca, it seems though, will not be signing a right-back this summer. I just don't see it on the cards, especially because of finances, and it will especially not be a right-back like Cancelo and Anel Martinez. Most likely, if they do even get a centre-back, it'll be Fresneda, and he just doesn't have the kind of qualities that you would need for an inverting role. The next choice, which I suspect is what Xavi could have been planning on going for, is to switch to a permanent back three system. The signings of both Inigo Martinez and Mikel, as well as Xavi's insistence on getting a top quality pivot, lend further credence to this claim. A fixed back three of Christensen, Araujo and Koundé could then have a midfield four of Pedri, Gavi, Frenkie and Gundogan. However, this would mean benching Balde or converting him to a left winger to share minutes with Ansu, Abde or whoever else Barcelona will have as a left wing option. This, again, I will say, is what Xavi was most likely going to do, especially if you consider that he was ready to part company with both Ansu and Abde, meaning Balde would most likely have wound up as the starting left winger. This formation, though, I should add here, would be the leakiest defensively for Barcelona because of that absence of wingbacks and just generally the absence of sufficient number of defensive players beyond just the three centre-backs. The third and final choice that I can think of would be for Xavi to try and pull off what Pep has done with John Stones and play with a centre-back who will invert into midfield to facilitate the WM antics going forward. This option would for sure provide the greatest defensive cover, as we saw with City's run in the UCL last season, and theoretically this would be a feasible option because Barca does have enough centre-backs to try that madness. You could easily start with a back four of Inigo, Christensen, Araujo and Koundé. In fact, I'd like to see Xavi try something like that in preseason or, when we travel to Balaidos to play Celta, because, we always leak goals at that stadium. Depth of the bench, though, would be the immediate biggest stumbling block because who exactly will be the backup options for these four centre-backs? Aside from Mikel and maybe Eric Garcia, there's no third and fourth option on the bench for that backup centre-back role. But also, I don't think Xavi will want people talking about him as a Pep copycat, especially because he's not a Pep copycat. They both just happen to be staunch Cruyffistas who seem to have arrived at the same conclusion of how to combat a deep block. Everything else about their approach to the game is quite different, actually. Maybe one day I'll get to overthinking about that. That day, though, will not be today because today I have to make a bold prediction, or at least an educated guess, on how exactly I think that Barcelona will play in the upcoming season. So, here goes. Bearing in mind that at the time of writing and recording this, not even a single game has been played in preseason. So, now that I've gotten my disclaimer out of the way, I think that Xavi is going to go with option number 2, and that next season he will fully begin transitioning Barca into a back three system, one with a double pivot for added stability. The main reasons why I think that this is going to be the case is because, first of all, Xavi said this is how he would like his team set up in that coaching voice video he did when he was still at Al-Sadd. But also, Xavi has been very keen on adding more centre-backs to his team, as well as him insisting on getting a top pivot and one more central midfielder. In addition to looking at who Xavi has wanted to be added to the squad, we can also look at whom he has wanted out of the picture. He doesn't seem to have much, if any, faith in his current options at left wing, whether Abde, Ansu or Ferran. For that reason, I think that he will try and work with Balde as a left winger and share those minutes for that position between Balde and Dansu, with Abde likely being loaned out like we've seen Pablo Torre and Nico Gonzalez have been. Using Balde as a left winger also makes sense because should push come to shove and should Barca need to dig deep to defend a lead, Balde will be more than comfortable to drop into the left back spot, and with all of Xavi, Pedri, Gundogan, Frankie and or Romeu, there would also be enough bodies to track back and to give Barca the same sort of defensive rigidity that was so vital to them strolling to La Liga last season. In the end, of course, we will just have to wait and see what will transpire, and the good news is we won't have to wait too long because we're less than 4 weeks away from the start of the new season. But until then, this has been Blaugrana Everything, and this is how I think that Xavi's Barca will set up for next season. So I thank you all for tuning in. Have a great day, and Forza Barca.